Perry, and I live in the town of Stratford, which is distinct from the, well, it is part of the county of Stratford, but distinct from Stratham and Stratford, which is way up north. That's how I introduce myself in most of these interviews, just to eliminate the confusion. I'm running for, well, I guess you could call it my fourth term in the House of Representatives. I was swept in 2006, swept out in 2010, and I guess you could say swept in again in a special election last summer. So I'm back in, so that means I've served 5 years, and I've served 5 years on the House Election Law Committee, which is historically a partisan committee. It really wasn't so much of a partisan committee in 4 years where Democrats were the majority in the legislature of New Hampshire. 4 years, it was the first time in 140 years, but it's certainly a partisan committee again. 5 years I fought the photo ID bill, lost this year. We know that there is no voter fraud in New Hampshire. However, 75% of the people in New Hampshire believe there is. So that's a pretty successful marketing campaign on the part of proponents of the photo ID bill. The real purpose of that photo ID bill is to disenfranchise voters who tend to vote Democratic. People who tend to vote for Democrats, that is, students, the elderly, the disabled, and those people who move around the country and only stay in New Hampshire for a short period of time. My understanding of the New Hampshire Constitution is that there is a recognition within that Constitution that, and case law confirms, that people can have more than one residence, but only one domicile for voting purposes. So there is this recognition both in the New Hampshire Constitution and in the case law of that principle. There are some people who don't like that principle. They don't like students who may vote liberal. That's certainly the position of Speaker William O'Brien, who is quite happy with the result of SB 289, which is the photo ID bill. But it needs to be eminently clear that in this election, no one will be disenfranchised, or I should say in this September primary, no eligible voter will be disenfranchised. It does get a little more complicated for the general election, but no one this year, again, no legitimate eligible voter is going to be disenfranchised. However, the soft initiation of the photo ID bill that's taking place this year will be repealed and replaced by a much tougher bill that will come into being for the elections in 2013 going forward. So all people need to know at this point is that if they are an eligible voter, they will not be disenfranchised no matter what they might be told. Again, I'm running for re-election, and I would like to serve again on the Election Law Committee, believing that, well, knowing by way of the New Hampshire Constitution that we have a fundamental constitutional right to vote in New Hampshire. That is a right derived from the Constitution, as opposed to privileges that we have, like driving an automobile or banking or the hundreds of things that we do. Those are privileges. The rights that we get as citizens of New Hampshire and citizens of this country are provided by the constitutions. So I look forward to serving the constituents in the new district, House District 3, which is now 2 towns, so it went from 6 towns to 2. So the 2 towns that it is right now, District 3, is Stratford and New Durham. And I'll be out campaigning beginning next week, and I hope to meet everyone in the district and convey my thoughts about the importance of voting and about the importance of this election in particular. Thank you. In addition to what I mentioned earlier about eligible voters not being disenfranchised this year, I would also like to add that there is no voter fraud in New Hampshire. Let's say among 1 million votes, there have been 4 convictions, perhaps 5, none of them for impersonation fraud. And impersonation fraud is what photo ID would protect against. So the fact that there have been no convictions for impersonation fraud in New Hampshire makes this photo ID bill completely needless. In addition, I need to mention that the real problem lies with election fraud. The distinction is, voter fraud is fraud committed by a voter against existing election laws, whereas election fraud is fraud perpetrated on a voter. There is rampant election fraud nationwide in this country. We'll be hearing more about it in this upcoming election. We've heard a lot about it in previous elections, occurring in such places as Florida, Ohio, several other states. It's important to note here also that the voting machines, so-called, that we will be using in the next election, pretty much as in the past, probably to a higher percentage, let's call it 85%. 85% of the votes cast in this fall's election will be cast on basically computers, and those computers are programmed. And those computers are programmed in complete secret by a private corporation. That is untenable. We have essentially privatized our election process by way of not knowing how the machines are programmed, and therefore what the actual results are once we tally those results from these computers. So to the towns that continue to hand count, I say good for you. Keep it up. That is pure democracy at its best. And for the other 85% of the votes that will be tallied this election, I say we need to fix that problem and fix it immediately. Not saying I have the answer necessarily, but I know that having served on election law, there was a prototype machine, voting machine that was used. I don't believe there's anything better than a hand count. Hand counts necessitate volunteers to count those ballots, but I would much prefer to have ballots counted by people who I know in my community, people who, in case of perceived fraud, can be located and questioned, rather than losing our votes into a machine which can manipulate that vote. And I'll give you a good example of manipulation of those machines. In election 2000, Al Gore received a negative 16,022 votes. Now, the memory card on that machine had been manipulated. It's the only explanation. So, just to repeat, Al Gore received a negative 16,022 votes. These machines are vulnerable. We have to have a better process. And I advocate for hand counts. Thank you very much.